I think it's exactly the same in business as well. You might come across a big challenge, which immediately maybe flusters you or you don't expect. And it's easy to kind of panic and then potentially have a negative reaction to that. But it's worth actually just trying to relax, trying to take it in, to process it, and then working out how you're going to fight through that and overcome it.
Hello and welcome to Run the Business, the podcast that explores the place where running and leadership come together. We'll find out how running can help us with leading, managing people, and generally being better in business. We'll also try and answer that question, do runners make better leaders? I'm Anthony Gay, and today I'm joined by a CEO who's not only into his running, but is also a competitor in triathlon and Ironman events. His business, Kona Energy, focuses on developing clean energy and delivering a carbon zero future. Lots to talk about on the pod today. Andy Willis, welcome to Run the Business.
Thanks for having me on, Anthony.
Andy, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, just working from central London from the office in Bloomsbury. And first day in a while, we've got quite blue skies out there. So it's quite a relaxing walk from the tube in this morning.
So not a run, because that's one of the early questions in Run the Business is, when were you last out running?
Yeah, sadly not this morning. I did go to the gym this morning, but I went for a run a couple of days ago on Wednesday evening. So I ran from where I am at the moment, from in the office, over to Regent's Park, which is kind of North London, close to kind of Marylebone. There's a very easy loop you can do of Regent's Park. And then at the back of Regent's Park, you've got Primrose Hill as well, which London's a pretty flat place, as I'm sure a lot of people know. So it's one of the kind of few hills in central London. So I ran it there a couple of times, and that was about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. So you get a great view of the kind of lights of London when you get up there. So yeah, that was the last run I did.
Sounds great. And tell us a little bit about your running journey, Andy, and how the triathlons and the Ironman sort of came about as well. When did it all start for you?
So growing up, I always played a huge amount of team sports, so mainly rugby, but also hockey and cricket. And I was always kind of very sporty, and those were my passions. So not endurance sports as such. I would always need some sort of ball to be chasing to really motivate me. I played a lot of rugby at university as well, to a kind of reasonable standard. And then it was actually post-university, kind of moving down to London, where other things in life start to kind of take over. You can't commit as much to, say, a team sport. And that really kind of turned me towards endurance sports. I'd always kind of seen people doing marathons or potentially triathlons, and was quite in awe of what they were doing. And I thought, that is cool. I should give that a go. And the beauty of it, when you are moving to a new city, let's say, is obviously you can do it on your own time. And that's how I really got into it. So I started just kind of going for runs, not really knowing what I was doing. I'd just go for a run and try and run as fast as I possibly could, break your PB. It would take a few days to recover, and then kind of do exactly the same thing. And then over time, I just kind of got more and more into running events, triathlon events, endurance events, started to take a slightly more kind of structured mindset with it. And now I'd say it's one of my big passions and something I couldn't really live without.
And the other side of your life is business. Kona Energy is where you are CEO. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Kona Energy, we're a clean energy company, an energy storage company. I set up the business about 18 months ago now. And basically we're developing large energy storage projects in the UK. So in the UK at the moment, we're doing quite well in the rollout of our renewable portfolio, so mainly in the form of wind, offshore wind, and solar PV. But unfortunately, at the minute, we don't really have a means of storing those large volumes of energy in a kind of cost-efficient way. So what we're doing is we're developing these big energy storage projects which connect kind of directly into the national grid, which in effect store renewable energy when there's too much of it on the system. So for example, when it's sunny or windy on 2 p.m. on a sunny day, there's not much demand on the grid. So we'll store that energy at that point in time. And then come say 6, 7 p.m, people go home, it gets dark, demand spikes on the grid. We'll release that power from the batteries back to the grid. And it will mean national grid, the people kind of running the electricity system, won't have to turn on a gas-fired power station or a coal-fired power station to meet that shortfall in energy.
This makes total sense to me, and it sounds obvious. Why aren't we doing it already? Why is this not something that exists now?
It's a good question. It's an industry that's really only taken off in the last probably 2 to 3 years. And I think traditionally it was very difficult to store energy, and batteries were kind of a natural solution to that. But in short, the technology wasn't good enough and they were far too expensive to actually roll out in a kind of economic sense, which wasn't just going to drive up everybody's fuel bills. In the likes of Elon Musk and what he's done with Tesla, he's managed to kind of scale a whole industry, not only in the kind of automotive sense, but also in the kind of energy transition sense. So now batteries and big grid connected batteries, which are kind of in effect power stations, can connect to the grid and offer this as a much cheaper service than, say, using that energy from burning gas or coal or diesel or whatever it may be. So it's really just the fact the industry's scaled in the last few years, which has meant this is now an economic solution which people are rolling out globally.
Now, I know you're obviously a successful businessman. When did you sort of the environmental side of what you do? Would you consider yourself an environmentalist, or how much is that sustainability part of who you are as well as what the company's doing?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And in the last couple of answers, I've obviously discussed kind of, high level markets and economics, and that's the environment I'm kind of working in at the moment. But the mission of the business is ultimately to deliver the zero carbon future and sustainability, and kind of trying to ward off the worst effects of climate change is really at the heart of that. So at university, I studied geography. There was quite a large kind of socioeconomic and focus and an energy focus and climate change focus. So that really kind of impassioned me back then. And I've been working in the sector in clean energy or energy storage for the last kind of 7 or 8 years or so. So from a personal perspective, that is ultimately the reason I'm doing this, to really try and help decarbonize our power system and to reduce, the impacts of climate change globally. And I think from a kind of, what we're doing as a company, Kona Energy, we're really trying to tackle the power system initially, because if you can decarbonize the power system, then you can start decarbonizing the way we heat our homes, the way we power our cars, as we kind of transition to electric vehicles. And I view the power system as the kind of starting place to really have a kind of large macro impact on what's going on in the UK and the world.
And I do my best to try and sort of be across what's going on in this space. Is electricity the future, in your opinion?
I think so. And I think we're already seeing it to some extent. In the UK, we're rolling out renewables at a rate of knots, but you can also see it just if you walk down the street in terms of the number of people now driving electric vehicles. And it seems, electrification is we know how to do it. We know how to electrify power systems. We know how to electrify the transport systems. There are other technologies coming along, such as hydrogen, which in my opinion is kind of slightly earlier on. But me personally and the business, we're technology agnostic. Anything that can have an impact in a positive way, I'd get behind whoever's trying to do that, or whichever company's pushing that forward.
This podcast, Andy, is all about how running might help people in business and in leadership. So, let's get into this space. How does running help you be better in life and in work?
I think running on the whole for me is a kind of very meditative process. And I love the feeling of just being able to go either before work or after work and just, go for either just a few kilometers or almost longer, and really get that kind of transcendence when you're running, that complete headspace where you escape the busy day. It gives you some clarity in terms of thoughts, but also, that kind of relaxation state with running where you forget all the kind of stresses and worries of the day and can just be at one with where you are and just kind of pounding the pavement. So from my perspective, that's one of the really, really big factors of running. Yeah, that meditative state.
Is that easy to do in a city like London? Because, I've run in London and it's pretty full on in terms of the senses. I guess it depends where you go, but it can be quite overpowering. How do you sort of get into that state in a city? Because I'm guessing from what you're saying, many of your runs are around London. You mentioned the parks, but even then, you're not that far away from the big energy of the city, are you?
No, you're right. It's a good point. And I think wherever you go in London, there's always going to be quite a few people. And if I'm running from the office here in central London out to, say, the Thames or out to Regent's Park or wherever it may be, that first kind of couple of kilometers, you're more focused on to some extent getting to their destination. But again, in a funny way, just having that short-term focus on exactly what's in front of you rather than anything going on in the world is quite satisfying. Don't get me wrong, though, I wouldn't want to do that the whole time, just kind of running through crowded London streets. But there are a lot of beautiful places you can run in London. The Thames Path, which goes for miles all the way from kind of Richmond all the way to London, and East London is very pretty. In North London, you've got places like Hampstead Heath, which, compared to, I'd say, the kind of real countryside, well, it doesn't really compare, but it is a very nice spot where you can actually go and kind of hit the trails and really feel you're out of the city. And alongside that, you've got all the royal parks as well. Hyde Park, St. James's Park, which are really good kind of central places, which you can just kind of run over to in your lunch break, which is really nice to have.
And do you get flexibility in your work day? Because one of the things that we talk a lot about on the podcast is that sense of structure to your day, and how for some people running at a certain time of the day sets them up for a series of meetings and sets them up for a certain mindset. For others, they kind of have to cram it in at other points in the day. What does it sort of, what time do you feel you are better running, and how does that fit in with the rest of the stuff that you've got going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say for me, it's either in the morning, first thing, straight out of bed, or in the evening. But in the winter especially, I do like the flexibility of trying to get out over my lunch hour. And I'm fairly flexible. We're a small company with both myself and the few members of staff we have, that to encourage people to get out and actually get some fresh air at lunchtime, whether that's to go for a run or just to go for a walk. And I think especially in the winter, it is so refreshing to get out when it's quite cold. You might have to put a hat or some gloves on, but you get that kind of vitamin D hit as well over the lunchtime, which is satisfying. I think to some extent, the business, we might be traveling one week or just in the office one week, and you might have meetings on certain days. So you are to some extent governed by what's going on within the working week. But whatever happens, I do like to carve out some time in the day to kind of have that period where you can put your phone down and just go off and run or cycle or whatever it may be, and kind of get away from it all.
Is there a time of the day where you feel you're better at making bigger decisions and deciding important things about where the business is going? Do you consciously sort of consider your sort of state and the job that you have in hand at that point? Is that something you do?
Yeah, I'd say generally in the mornings, I feel at my sharpest and my most efficient. So at that point, I'll come in and I'll try not to get too kind of engrossed in emails at that point. So that'll be, the real kind of thought process to work out, what are we doing this week? What's the strategic focus? And then perhaps the afternoon, that's where I'll kind of get into the more nitty gritty of what you're doing on your different projects and keeping everything up to speed. But the morning, I kind of feel freshest. I've often done some sort of exercise in the morning. So you've kind of already had that slight endorphin hit. You're ready to go with the day. You feel motivated. When you get to lunch, you're always going to get that kind of post-lunch lull. So that's why I prefer doing most of my really important activities in the morning.
When you do go running, is it mainly on your own, or do you take people with you? Is running something that is there in the business with some of the other people, or is it just a completely separate thing that you do and nobody else does?
On the whole, I'd say I run by myself. And again, probably due to this kind of timings, whether that's in the morning or the evening. But there are a lot of running clubs in London. So I run with one of those in particular. They do a few sessions each week, and I'm particularly fond of their kind of Thursday night tempo session, which is around Battersea Park in South London. So it's a great kind of 3-kilometer park, basically a nice loop you can do, very well lit, even in the kind of winter months. And that's a very social activity. It's a very big club. So there's all different standards of running, right from your kind of everyday runner right up to kind of professional. So you can just fit in, what works for you. I really do enjoy running with other people. And I always find those sessions, for example, those tempo sessions where you're actually training, you always push yourself harder and kind of go much faster than you might normally when there's other people around you pushing you on and motivating you.
Were you in London when the Olympics was on in 2012?
Sadly not. I moved down in about 2015. So I went to a couple of the events. I was living back home in kind of Oxfordshire way at that point. But I heard all those kind of legendary stories of the buzz and, people chatting on the tube about it. But no, I wasn't there. Were you, Anthony?
Briefly, I mean, we had an office at the time in London. So I was spending a few days in the week in the office and down in London. And yeah, that buzz, that energy was just amazing. And the camaraderie with running events, it reminded me a little bit of that, because there's that spirit, isn't there, where at a running event, whether it's a marathon, a park run, or whatever. And I'm sure it's the same in the Ironman and triathlon events as well, where everybody's there sharing the same goal, the same energy, and doing the same thing. And for whatever reason, that shared energy just lifts everybody up. I just wondered if you'd got any sort of experience, in some of the events that you've done, of that sense of being able to lift your performance because of the people around you.
Yeah, no, I think just on your first point on kind of those London events, I've never been fortunate enough to do the London Marathon, but most years if I'm in London that weekend, I'll go down and watch. And yeah, the atmosphere on that event, both the runners and the spectators, is just incredible. And of course, it spans a pretty large part of London. So wherever you go, there's that massive buzz, and it's always one of the best days of the year to go down and spectate, even if you're not running. In terms of events I've done recently, it was actually a triathlon rather than a pure running event, but there's a series called the ROC, ROC, and they do 3 races in the UK where it's a triathlon, and basically you swim in a sea or a lake, and then you cycle to the highest mountain in that country, so Wales, England and Scotland. I've done the one in Wales and England, but the one in Wales is my favourite, where you cycle to the bottom of Mount Snowdon, and then you basically run up Snowdon and then back down Snowdon, and then you actually get back on the bike. But it's a very unique event because obviously you're running up a mountain, but then you're actually then running back on yourself down the kind of same trail that you've just come up. And it's a small event. There's probably only a couple of hundred people do it, but it's really great because you're then passing the other participants on the way back down. And I've never been in such an event where everyone's just struggling at that point. You're trying to basically climb a mountain. There's not too much actual kind of running that's involved. It's more just, pulling yourself up and really trying to get up. But everyone's so supportive, both people coming up and both people coming down. And you really get that buzz, which then kind of carries you through the rest of the race.
Do you ever think when you're coming down and you're seeing people coming up, do you ever have that feeling of how far they are behind you? Because I know these sorts of events, they're not races, but we can't help in our heads sort of think about where we are in the pack and the setup.
No, exactly. It's one of those slight kind of niches of those kind of events. You know approximately when you've turned around, when you pass someone, maybe they're a minute from the top and they've got to turn around, and you start kind of calculating it in your head, and you might be thinking they're better on the descent, you might be better on the ascent, and trying to work it down. So from a kind of competitive standpoint, that definitely comes in. But then it's also very nice that when you're running down, you can also give some of the other participants just a quick time check to some extent, and just say, there's only 5 minutes to go or 10 minutes to go. And they always appreciate that as well, because especially with a mountain, often it can get quite, foggy or misty at the top, and you might only be able to see a few hundred meters ahead. So that also gives them that little lift, but there's not too much further to go.
How would you describe your style, your leadership style? What sort of leader are you?
In general, in life or business or sport back in the day, I think you've got to lead by example, and not be afraid to kind of do the grunt work to some extent, and get your hands dirty and really set that example for the rest of the team. And I think running and sport in general is such a good kind of medium to inspire that, because ultimately it's so humbling. Whatever you're doing in your business life or your personal life, if you're going out the next day and then doing a hard training session, then that really keeps you grounded. And I think, the people that you're working with, they want to see that the people at the top are also doing the hard work and really pulling their weight. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's doing inspiring speeches or anything like that, but I think it's just getting on with it, trying to be a very good sounding board, trying to educate people as they go through the process, and staying as humble as possible.
Thinking of the work you're doing with Kona, how do you influence and educate people to the work that you're doing, which obviously sustainability is so important, and the work you're doing sounds amazing, and there will be people that will go, yeah, and it's somebody else's problem, or it's I can't affect that. It's too big for me to do anything about. What's your posture when you are spreading the word of the work that you're doing?
I think the climate change element is always such an important factor that you really want to get across whoever you're dealing with. But you're right, Anthony, that for some people that might be lower down their agenda, and in the cost of kind of living crisis at the minute, energy bills are very high. People might not be thinking about climate change when they're making those tough decisions between heating or eating. So I think for us, it's also trying to actually show the values of this technology as something that can actually reduce energy bills. If we have, say, energy storage on our system, ultimately that will drive down the cost of energy. We'll be using a lot more renewable energy at better times of day. We'll not be using expensive, say, gas or coal-fired power stations, and really trying to drive that message that this isn't some kind of virtue signaling. This is something that can actually help all of us in the short term and the long term, and trying to get both those messages across. From a business perspective, obviously we speak to a lot of people in our day-to-day. You try and get that message across. We have a bit of a communications team which speak to a lot of people in the press and have social media accounts, and trying to get that message out as well. And then in the company, I think, the people that are joining over time, generally most of them will again have that kind of ideal that they want to make a difference and do something that's going to help the climate. So that to some extent sells itself, and those people are already very motivated by that mission.
You mentioned social media and different technological platforms that exist for communication, and tech in sport and in business is so important these days. How do you sort of see that relationship between the messaging and the technology that is used? Is it something that in your time with Kona, you've seen the importance of social media and other platforms to get your message across? Is that grown? I'm assuming it has, but I'm just curious to get your take on it.
No, it has. And I think on the whole, we're very much a kind of business to business kind of company. We're dealing with a lot of utilities and the likes of National Grid, in which case the social media is probably less relevant, but we really want to push out the message anyway, that what we're doing is important, that it's making a difference. So, we've got an active Twitter page, for example, where we're showing how many renewables have been used at a place and time on the system, highlighting how energy storage can help kind of decarbonize the system going forward. And it's such a valuable tool in terms of getting your message out there, engaging with different people, creating new leads for a business function as well. So it is so important. And then from a technology perspective, I guess more widely, these energy storage projects, they're very kind of digital assets. So there's a trading function behind them. To really get the most out of them, it requires kind of very smart tech and software to automate them and optimize them in the different traded markets. So yeah, I'd say it's very important in the world we're in.
How data-driven are you when it comes to running and business? Are you somebody that's always looking at the stats and your watch and seeing how you can improve the incremental gains? Are you that kind of person?
For better or worse, Anthony, yes, I am. I've got a Garmin. I'm wearing it at the minute, and I normally do track all my data and all my runs and bike rides and whatnot. And I do follow a program, which again is focused more on the kind of more on triathlon, but you can see what set you've got to do in a certain day. It's great kind of having that data to overlay that to know if you're ultimately getting better, but also it gives you those signals that potentially you might want to have a few days where you take it easy and you're not trying to cheat every set on the sessions you've been prescribed. You might then think, actually, I just want to go out on a weekend and go for kind of a soul-filling, long, slow endurance run where, I'm actually recovering as well. But on the whole, I am quite data-driven, both in the running and the business.
So what's your body battery reading at the moment, if we're having a little Garmin geek off?
Oh, good question. Let me find it quickly. Body batteries is 72.
I'm 65, so we're in a similar sort of zone.
That's good. We'll see what it is by the end of the day.
So if anybody's listening to this, and you mentioned, Kona is a B2B company, but if people are listening to this and want to understand more about this space, have you got any sort of advice, any tips, anything that people could be reading that would help them understand a bit more about the work that you're doing and what they might do as individuals?
I think the work we're doing, obviously you can always go and check out Kona Energy's website or Twitter page, for example, that there's some high level information on that. Most of the big newspapers are covering energy and the climate crisis on a daily basis. So I'd encourage people to just engage with those publications going forward. There's a lot more kind of niche websites such as energystoragenews.com or current.co.uk, which have a lot more kind of nitty gritty on the industry itself. On a personal capacity, there's lots of things you can do, and it's about kind of starting with the really small steps, in my opinion. So let's say you can get public transport to work rather than driving, or if you're in distance, you could run or cycle into work. I'd encourage that. There's other decisions you can make further down the line, which might require a lot more kind of planning and foresight, but are likely to save you money in the long run, such as investment in, say, solar panels or heat pumps in your home.
Are there any specific examples where running has taught you a lesson, has given you something that you've been able to transfer over into your work or elsewhere into your life?
I think, yes, for sure. Lots of different examples. One of the ones that jumps to mind is whenever I go to a new city or town, or whether I'm with work or on holiday, I always like going for a run in the morning and just exploring and just kind of getting to know that different location or place. And often I rarely run over a phone or music or anything like that. So I'll just go off and kind of trust my sense of direction. On the whole, it gets me back to the hotel or wherever I'm staying. But a few times it has kind of got me lost. And then suddenly you're thinking, I've got a meeting at this time, and I'm going to be late. And you immediately, just like in business, you kind of feel the panic levels rising and that slight bit of stress and anxiety. But I think running, teaches you resilience, and then you realize that's not really going to solve anything. It's actually worth just slowing down, stopping for a second, trying to get your bearings, maybe speaking to someone or finding a kind of local map. And it's a very small example in the running world, but I think it's exactly the same in business as well. You might come across a big challenge, which immediately maybe flusters you or you don't expect. And it's easy to kind of panic and then potentially have a negative reaction to that. But it's worth actually just trying to relax, trying to take it in, to process it, and then working out how you're going to fight through that and overcome it.
Is Kona in a different place now compared to what its objective was, what its purpose was when you set it up? Can you see that change in your business?
I'd say we're still kind of focused on that mission statement of trying to deliver the zero carbon future and rolling out, more projects. But of course, there have been challenges along the way. We face a lot of kind of policy issues at the minute, just with the fact that a lot of this technology in the UK is very new. And we're waiting for that, government-led policy to catch up. And you're kind of twiddling your thumbs to some extent on some work streams, because until that happens, there's a lot of stuff you're just inhibited by. So we're also looking at some other markets. We're looking at moving into Texas, actually, to roll out some energy storage projects there, which I wouldn't have envisaged, setting up the business 18 months, 2 years ago.
In terms of, we've talked about your leadership style, but thinking of other leaders and where you get your energy and inspiration from, does anybody springs to mind that you look up? I mean, maybe, as you were, before you were setting the business up and when you were, getting into this space, who inspires you?
One book, actually, which inspires me, I've never met them, but I imagine a lot of your listeners may have listened to it, or I'd recommend it if not, but is Phil Knight, the guy who founded Nike. And he's written a book called Shoe Dog, and it's his kind of journey from setting up Nike, and back in the day where running wasn't really a popular activity at all, and not that many people did it, but he loved it. He was a kind of a track athlete at university and created this running business, and it takes you through the journey of the company and the kind of his personal journey and all the challenges he faced, kind of how they overcame them, and obviously ultimately Nike's a very successful company. But there's a lot of resilience lessons there and lessons on kind of how to deal with people and approach different challenges. So yeah, that's a book I think you can read more than once, and occasionally I'll just go back to it and skim through a few chapters just to kind of get that motivation back up.
Was there ever a point where you thought like that and thought, I can't do this, this is too much? Has there been a point where you've questioned the work that you're doing?
I don't think so. I think because what underpins it, you may well have hard times and hard challenges you've got to face, but I can take solace in the fact that what we're doing is ultimately very important and it's a good thing. And that if we have success, we'll kind of have success for the climate going forward as well. So that is the underlying driver, which I guess is the thing you can just keep on going back to, which keeps you focused and keeps your direction going forward.
Which sounds like it's so embedded in your values that it's, what you're doing is just who you are. Yeah, it's work, it's a job, but it's actually something that you're so passionate about. It's inside you. It has to come out in some way, doesn't it?
No, exactly. And I do really enjoy my job and the work day to day. But of course, there's always challenges and problems you've got to overcome. So it is very kind of refreshing and satisfying to just think back to that end goal and why you're doing it. And that often helps you just kind of then make the right decisions going forward.
Andy, running aside, can you name a business tool, an app, a person, something that you couldn't do without that helps Kona be successful?
Yeah, good question. So we use a tool called Land Insights, which just helps when we're, say, looking to develop and build new energy storage projects in the UK. It helps us identify basically where in the UK to place them, and it factors in, say, local planning policies and frameworks. And naturally, you don't want to be building these battery projects in kind of areas of outstanding natural beauty. It might point you towards kind of disused brownfield sites or perhaps former coal-fired power stations, things like that, which can both help the communities and mean you're not going to be upsetting people by building these projects in nice areas at the end of the day.
Okay, and what's that called?
Land Insight.
Okay, Land Insight. Interesting. And business aside, thinking of running, what's your favorite bit of running kit or accessory that you couldn't do without?
So I think on race day, especially on the triathlons, I always run with a white visor. And it's one of these ones I had probably since my first race. I maybe got it without really knowing what I was doing, but it's now a bit of a lucky charm. And whenever I get off, say, in an Ironman, you get off the bike and you're about to hit the run, that's the first thing, even before the trainers go on, the visor goes on, and then I've kind of got that lucky charm with me, which is also, serving a practical purpose of keeping the sun off your head and everything. But yeah, I'd say the running visor.
And what advice, Andy, would you give to anybody listening to this who's in a business or a leadership role, who's maybe not running, not taking fitness seriously at the moment, and they're considering getting more active and taking up running? What would you say?
Yeah, I definitely encourage them to get out there and give it a go. And there's so many benefits, obviously, both from a kind of physical health perspective, but also definitely a mental health perspective. Ironically, it's something else to fit into your day, but I find it actually makes me a lot more efficient and kind of gives me structure, because I know at some point in the day I'm going to be doing this, which then means I'm not wasting time during the day. I'm really trying to be focused with my time and get the work done when I have it. So yeah, I'd encourage anyone to go out there, give it a go. Everyone starts at some point. Whenever anyone starts running, we've all gone out for a kilometer, maybe a couple of kilometers, and you build it up from there. And it's an incredibly satisfying experience.
Final question. It's a long way off, but is net zero by 2050? Is that a realistic goal that we can get to? What's your feeling on that?
I think it is. There's lots of challenges, but I think we're now getting to the point where people are engaged across society, but now it's getting to the point where the economics are really driving this forward. So solar energy, wind energy is the cheapest form of electricity generation. So it makes more sense from an economics perspective to roll out these kind of power stations rather than, say, a new gas-fired power station. So I really think the market's kind of now driving that, which is what we need, as well as people listening to this podcast, just to try and make those right decisions, those sensible, informed decisions. So there's a lot of work still to do, and I'd encourage people who are interested to visit our website, or feel free to drop me a line, because it's a very interesting space, and we're always looking for good people. But yeah, I think the UK and the world can hit those targets.
Andy, it's been fascinating to catch up. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck with everything that you're doing with Kona Energy.
Thanks very much, Anthony.
Thanks to Andy Willis for being part of Run the Business this week. Fascinating to learn more about clean energy and how that space is developing. I don't have any evidence to back this up, but I sense that runners, and I suppose anybody spending more time outdoors and in tune with the environment, is going to be more connected to what's going on in the space that Andy's talking about, and wanting to play their part as well. Don't panic was something I took away from that chat with Andy. Running teaches us resilience. Slow down, take a moment, get your bearings, process the problem, and work out how you're going to address it. Most stuff that we think is so important now, this moment, today, this week, this month, it won't even matter in 6 months, and probably will be completely forgotten in the years to come. Running is something that, especially when you're able to get into that flow state, gives you a detached perspective, a calmness that I think is really useful as a tool to take into other parts of your life, including business. If you're listening to this and you know someone who could make a good guest on Run the Business, then please do get in touch. We can do the legwork in chasing them down, but it'd be good to know the kind of people you'd like to hear on the podcast. And also if you'd like to hear more running chat or more business chat, or even if you think we've got the balance right at the moment, please get in touch. The show is at Run the Business on Insta and the same on Twitter as well. And you can get me at Anthony Gay, ANTHONYGAY, on Twitter as well. It'd be great to hear from you. Until next time, keep running and keep chasing your goals.